Modern life teaches us that we must always be available. Available to reply to messages, to answer phone calls, to meet the needs of others, to produce incessantly. Our culture celebrates the person who never says no, who is always ready for one more commitment, one more task, one more demand. But what happens when we choose to no longer be available? What occurs when we establish clear boundaries between our inner world and external demands? Carl Jung, one of the great thinkers of the human mind, offers us a fascinating perspective on this issue. For Jung, setting boundaries is not an act of selfishness, but a necessity for fully developing as individuals. On this journey, we will explore how the act of ceasing to be available can profoundly transform our relationship with ourselves and the world. We will see how this apparent distance can, in fact, bring us closer to a more authentic and meaningful life. Jung once wrote, "Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." Today, we will look inward to understand the transformation that occurs when we allow ourselves the right not to always be available. Jung saw life as a journey of self-discovery, a process he called individuation. This path leads us to discover not only our conscious qualities, but also those parts of ourselves we normally do not see. And to undertake this journey, we need time and space, something that constant availability steals from us. In our hyper-connected world, being always available has become almost a moral obligation. We reply to messages at midnight, bring work home, and attend to the needs of everyone around us. This limitless availability seems virtuous, but Jung would see it as a great danger to our mental and spiritual health. When we are constantly available to the external world, we develop what Jung called an exaggerated persona. The persona is like a social mask we wear, the face we show the world, our public personality. It is necessary for living in society, but if we over-identify with this mask, we lose touch with who we truly are. The persona, Jung said, is what one is not, but what oneself and others think one is. When we live in constant availability, this mask takes over. We begin to exist only to meet external expectations, forgetting to listen to our own needs, desires, and inner wisdom. This imbalance creates a strange contradiction in our lives. On the outside, we may appear successful and connected. On the inside, we feel a growing emptiness. Jung observed this pattern in many of his patients, people who seemed to have everything externally but felt hollow and disconnected from themselves internally. Many people suffer from the neurosis of normality, Jung said. That is, they function perfectly in society, follow all the rules, do what is expected of them, but have lost touch with their own soul. Constant availability is one of the quickest paths to this neurosis of normality. When we are always available to others, we also lose contact with important parts of ourselves. Jung believed that our conscious mind is just the tip of the iceberg. Beneath, it lies a vast territory of memories, emotions, intuitions, and wisdom he called the unconscious. It is in this deep inner space that we find our true resources, our creativity, and our most authentic answers to life's challenges. However, the unconscious can only communicate with us when we create silence and space. It speaks through dreams, intuitions, synchronicities, and moments of creative insight, all of which are blocked by the constant noise of perpetual availability. Moreover, constant availability deeply affects our vital energy. Jung observed that our psychic energy, which he called libido, not in the Freudian sexual sense but as general life force, is limited. When we scatter it in 1,000 directions, responding to every external stimulus, we become exhausted and disconnected from our inner source of renewal. This exhaustion is not just physical but spiritual. Jung wrote, "Among so-called primitive peoples, I observed that some tribes consider dreams as a time when the soul leaves the body and travels. They criticize missionaries, saying, 'You whites are always thinking, you always want something. You are always restless. We do not think all the time, we also let thoughts come to us.' This primitive wisdom recognizes something our modern culture has forgotten: the need for moments when we are not doing, wanting, or responding, moments when we are simply being and receiving. When we choose not to be available, even for brief periods, something profound begins to happen in our psyche. Jung compared this protected inner space to a temenos, a Greek word meaning a sacred space, a sanctuary. Within this inner sanctuary, we can finally hear that quieter voice within us, what Jung called the self. Unlike the ego, our conscious identity, the self represents the deepest center of our psyche, containing not only who we already are consciously, but also who we might become. The self, Jung wrote, is not only the center, but also the whole, circumference that embraces both conscious and unconscious. It is the center of this totality, just as the ego is the center of the conscious mind. When we are always externally available, we live only within the small circle of the ego. When we create space for unavailability, we allow this larger circle of the self to begin manifesting in our lives. This protected inner space allows us to encounter parts of ourselves we normally neglect or repress. One of these parts is what Jung called the shadow, aspects of our personality we consider unacceptable or simply do not recognize as our own. The shadow is not necessarily negative. It contains both our flaws and valuable qualities we have not developed. For example, someone who always presents themselves as helpful and available may have in their shadow an undeveloped ability to set healthy boundaries and care for themselves. Jung said, "One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious." When we allow ourselves moments of unavailability, we create the space needed for this encounter with our shadow. It can be uncomfortable at first. We may feel guilt for saying no, anxiety for not responding to every demand, or fear of disappointing others. But it is precisely through this discomfort that we grow. The space of unavailability also allows for what Jung called the transcendent function, the psyche's ability to transform inner tensions into a higher creative synthesis. It is as if our mind has its own wisdom, which can only operate when we are not constantly interfering with external demands. Jung observed this process in his own life. After his break with Freud, he went through a period of deep introspection he called his confrontation with the unconscious. He spent hours alone, exploring his dreams and fantasies, drawing mandalas, and conversing with figures from his imagination. From this seemingly unproductive period, from an external perspective, his most original and important ideas were born. This inner transformation that occurs in the space of unavailability can be compared to the growth process of a plant. A seed needs the darkness of the soil to germinate. Similarly, our most creative ideas, deepest intuitions, and most meaningful transformations often require a period of apparent inactivity, a time when, externally, it seems nothing is happening, but internally, vital processes are unfolding. Jung was fascinated by medieval alchemy, not as a primitive proto-chemistry, but as a symbolic system reflecting processes of psychic transformation. Alchemists spoke of the need for a sealed vessel where the primer, materia, could be transformed. Our psyche also needs this sealed vessel, a protected space where our energy does not constantly leak outward, but can circulate internally, transforming into something more valuable. One of the most surprising discoveries when we begin practicing selective unavailability is how it transforms our relationships. Contrary to what we might intuitively think, being less available often improves, rather than harms, our connections with others. Jung observed a problematic pattern in many relationships: projection. We project onto others unrecognized parts of ourselves, especially our shadow. Thus, we get irritated by others' selfishness without acknowledging our own selfish impulses, or we excessively admire qualities in others that we fail to see in ourselves. Everything that irritates us about others can lead us to an understanding of ourselves, Jung wrote. When we practice selective unavailability, we gain the necessary distance to identify our projections. We begin to recognize when we are reacting, not to the real person before us, but to aspects of our own psyche that we have projected onto them. This clarity profoundly changes the quality of our interactions. Instead of relationships based on neurotic need, unconscious dependence, or unrecognized projections, we become capable of seeing and accepting others as they truly are. As Jung said, "The meeting of two personalities is like the contact of two Chemical substances. If there is any reaction, both are transformed. Selective unavailability also transforms the kind of presence we offer others. When we are constantly available, paradoxically, we are less present. Our attention is fragmented, our energy diluted. When we practice periods of unavailability, we recharge our inner resources and become capable of a deeper, more attentive presence when we choose to be with someone. Jung saw relationships as one of the most important fields for psychological growth. He believed that certain aspects of our personality can only be developed through deep connections with other human beings. But for these relationships to be truly transformative, they need space and healthy boundaries. Without clear boundaries, relationships can easily fall into what Jung called mystical participation, a state of unconscious psychological fusion where we do not know where we end and the other begins. This fusion may initially seem intimate, but ultimately hinders genuine growth for both people. As Jung wrote, "To relate to another person in a mature way, you must first relate to yourself." Unavailability gives us the space needed for this crucial relationship with ourselves, which in turn forms the basis for healthier, deeper connections with others. This transformation also extends to group relationships. Jung observed how easily we abdicate our individuality in collective contexts, falling into what he called participation in the mass psyche. When we are always available to groups, whether family, work, or online communities, we risk losing our capacity for independent thought and moral discernment. Selective unavailability protects us from this absorption into collective mentality. It allows us to return to groups with a more centered and authentic presence, contributing not out of unconscious conformity, but from conscious individuality. Jung was not an advocate of permanent isolation or withdrawal. On the contrary, he believed in a balanced life where we alternate between social engagement and inner retreat, between availability and unavailability. This natural rhythm of expansion and contraction reflects the cycles of nature itself. Individuation. Jung wrote, does not mean isolation, but a more intensive cohesion with collective obligations. The purpose of creating spaces of unavailability is not to permanently withdraw from the world, but to allow ourselves to return to it with greater fullness, integrity, and authentic presence. When we practice this balance, we discover one of the central paradoxes of Jungian psychology. The more we become truly ourselves, the more deeply we can connect with others and the world. Selective unavailability is not an end in itself, but a means to a fuller, more authentic life. In practice, this can mean simple things: daily moments of silence and reflection, periods without electronic devices, occasional weekends of retreat, the courage to say no to preserve our energy, clear boundaries between work and personal life. Each person must find their own rhythm and way of creating these sacred spaces of unavailability. Jung emphasized that there is no one-size-fits-all formula. The path of individuation is deeply personal. The shoe that fits one person pinches another, he said. Each person must discover their own balance between availability and unavailability, between external connection and inner nourishment. Most importantly, we must recognize that in a culture that values constant availability, creating spaces of unavailability is an act of courage and self-respect. It is an acknowledgement that our inner life is as important as our outer activities, perhaps even more so. As Jung wrote, your vision will become clear only when you look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. In a world that constantly pulls our attention outward, the act of turning inward is revolutionary, and when we allow ourselves this inner space, we discover something surprising, a deeper availability to life in its fullness. We no longer react automatically, live by inertia, or conform to others' expectations. We become present in a fuller, more authentic way, both for ourselves and for others. When we stop being available to everything and everyone at all times, something truly shifts, not only in our subjective experience, but in the very fabric of our existence. Our relationships gain depth, our creativity flourishes, our intuition sharpens, our vital energy renews. Ultimately, Selective unavailability allows us to be more faithful to what Jung considered the central purpose of human life, to become who we truly are. The privilege of a lifetime, he wrote, is to become who you truly are. Perhaps the first step on this journey is simply learning to say, right now, I am not available. And in that sacred space of unavailability, discovering all the richness that awaits within us.